Thank you for being here today with me. From a very young age, I was a fan of bold and relentless improvisation and wanted to color outside the lines. So that was a snippet of a concert that I crashed my dad giving while he was traveling in Malaysia. And I was really eager to sort of show off my improvisational skills. But my journey with creativity wasn't always so clear-cut to me. I didn't always understand the relationship between improvisation and what that could do for me in terms of empowering me to discover myself. With years of learning and relearning, I finally arrived at a crucial insight: that creative catharsis, when it is made intentional, has a vital role to play in self-discovery and also facilitates psychological rebirth. As someone who'd grown up in a family of musicians since the age of 3, I had always taken for granted music practice. I'd always envisioned myself following the rhythms, the routines of traditional practice. But as I started to see the ways in which Carnatic music practice was able to allow me to access deeper parts of myself, which then promoted emotional restoration, I became empowered to use that as a way for me to promote wellness. In July this year, I had the incredible opportunity of hosting a meditative session that was the first of its kind in Kochi, India, where I fused the tools of mindfulness-based meditation alongside that of improvisational Carnatic music. And I was so heartened to be able to witness the emotional restoration that it provided to participants. I would like to play a short snippet of this video for you today so that you can see what went down in that beautiful, intimate space that I had curated. For me, this experience helped me understand something so crucial, which was this idea of connection, both within oneself and to others. And that brings me to a crucial insight that my interdisciplinary education allowed for me to achieve: that we are living in a time that is so unique but plagued with a very big crisis, that of emotional dysregulation. Emotional dysregulation, very simply put, can be defined by a challenge that many people face in being able to control heightened emotional responses and achieve an equilibrium state of emotions. I'm sure we all experience this from time to time, not being able to regulate our emotions, whether that's because of vicarious events happening around us that we can't control, or because of things that are happening to us in our personal lives. How might we then begin to seek restoration for ourselves within our lives? For me, discovering the facets of improvisation that Carnatic music facilitated allowed for me to look deeper inward and realize that self-expression that comes from this sort of intentional emotional equilibration will allow me to seek that emotional restoration. In high school, I became very comfortable finally asking these very important questions. Well, you see, as somebody who had been practicing traditional Carnatic music, I never had to question the norms of my practice. I simply had to show up on stages, and I just had to recite the songs that I had learned, and then maybe, like you'd seen in the video earlier, give a little bit of an improvisational take that I had about that raga. But I started to embrace the frustrations that I felt with that, only in high school, where I started to ask very difficult questions such as, why am I following these rules? And why couldn't I express myself differently? Why couldn't I actually just turn the forms of Carnatic music into one that was my own? And then, through that, I started to ask, what did authentic self-expression look like for me? And was that necessarily in alignment with the norms of Indian classical Carnatic music? These questions were difficult to grapple with, and they were very uncomfortable. Psychologists often say that we have existential questions like this from time to time, and the experience of an existential crisis is not uncommon, but it is a reflection that the scripts that we are living out in our lives are no longer serving us. Existential questions, or crises, simply put, are an invitation for us to look inward and to ask ourselves what it is that we are doing that is no longer serving us, and how might we step away from that and reclaim agency for ourselves in our lives. For me, music was the answer to that, but I didn't know exactly how to do that. In college, I was very lucky to have been a part of an excellent interdisciplinary curriculum. I started off as a philosopher, and throughout my time started embracing existential questions about the self. This then also, coupled with my scientific engagement, made me realize that there was something about my brain, both my emotional and my rational brain, that wanted slightly different things. I was sort of struggling to make the two sort of coexist together. And I also had a crucial insight in my second year, which was when I discovered Carl Jung's depth psychology. And I started to recognize that the subconscious was the house of all things, and it had answers to who I was at a particular given moment in time and why I did what I wanted to do. But in our everyday routine, regularized lives, we don't have the opportunity to invite this sort of deep exploration. And that is because we keep firing the same neuronal circuits that over time become familiar to us by habit. In my second year of college, I was so plagued with all of these existential questions that I decided to take a change of pace from my usual routine life in Singapore. I decided to spend the summer in London, where I thought the vibrant city life would inspire me to think more deeply about these questions and to then implement findings from these questions into my improvisation. I just knew I wanted something different, so it made sense to sort of step into a different environment. I remembered every day I was sort of experimenting with different sorts of ragas, and particularly at that time, I was very, very in love with this raga called Sindhu Bhairavi. A raga is basically a melodic scale, and Sindhu Bhairavi had paradoxical combinations of joyous and melancholic undertones. I kept experimenting with Sindhu Bhairavi that summer. I remember even with a hoarse voice because I'd gotten a sore throat for half of my trip. But these experimentations were not futile. I would experiment, take walks down, enjoying the vibrant city life, and I was sort of recording myself talking, and I was also recording myself singing. Over time, this culminated in a very interesting fusion of stream of consciousness-like prose combined with Carnatic music improvisational bits. And that led to the creation of my first ever song, Rebirth, which captured, unknowing to me, a psycho-spiritual journey of my self-discovery. I would like to play a small bit of the song for you right now, and I invite you to close your eyes and just listen to it and take it in as much as you can. If you want to listen to the rest of the song, you can do that later. But the reason I wanted to play this for you was because this musical practice that I had unknowingly sort of stepped into by trying to discover who I was culminated in this cross-genre experimentation. I call it psycho-spiritual after Carl Jung because it both represents a psychological aspect of me sort of looking inward and trying to discover who I was, but it's also spiritual because there's a certain kind of transcendence of the self that amalgamated in a musical creation that stepped out of boundaries, that felt true to who I was. Looking back at that summer, I recognize now what I was deeply frustrated with while I was in high school with my Carnatic music practice wasn't about the art form itself, but it was about what I was doing with the art form. I was frustrated because I wanted to do something that allowed for me to truly engage to the truths of my intercultural identity as a Singaporean Indian who was caught between the crossroads of two very dynamic and distinct cultures. And this sort of improvisation allowed for me to reclaim my power and to take that back in my hands and say, this is who I am, and this is how my music allows me to do that. While my Carnatic music practice has evolved, and currently my creative approach has resulted in 8 songs being released, I would never have thought that possible before. But these 8 songs being released has all been a representation to me about the potential of self-discovery and how intentional creative energy can help us get to know ourselves deeper. To me, it is also the fact that we can get to know ourselves and introduce a presence of mind into our everyday lives when we defy the norms of what we are doing. My music practice is still true to the techniques of Carnatic music. However, what it now does is merely articulate and process my emotions, my thoughts, and my ideas in a form that I resonate with the most. This allows for me to gain agency over myself, and it also allows for me to introduce presence of mind into my everyday life. When I'm struggling with something, I turn to intentionally writing about it and processing these emotions in a sonic landscape, allowing for me to sometimes bring to the surface of my consciousness things that may not necessarily be verbalized otherwise. Today, I hope that I've begun to scratch the surface merely about the potential that creative catharsis, specifically in the form of an intentional practice, has in inviting restoration into our everyday lives. There is a lot of research emerging right now, and we are only beginning to understand the effects that intentional creativity has on our well-being. For instance, creativity, when intentionally applied, is known to regulate cortisol levels, which is a stress hormone that allows for us to achieve equilibrium and restoration in our everyday lives. Creativity can also innovate our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system balances, allowing for us to be more well-rested and to step out of a fight-or-flight response and to be more relaxed. The findings from this are definitely evolving and coming before us as I speak, but it is all proof that creative energy can be harnessed and has restorative potential for all of us. Now, you may ask me, how does this apply to me? I'm not an artist. I don't do any art form. Well, I want to tell you this. You don't need to be an artist or you don't need to be a creative in order to reach into your creative potential. Creativity is an energy waiting to be harnessed within each one of us. You may start by asking yourself the following question. How might I step out of autopilot in my everyday life? How might I do things differently? Is there a space in my life where I am feeling emotions, discontent, feeling existential questions that I may start with? And take that as a starting stone to invite spontaneity into your life. Maybe you could go to that dance class that you've been wanting to go to and you don't want to go because you don't think you're a dancer. Or you may just pick up a paintbrush and start painting, right? It doesn't matter how you do this, but you have the potential to invite creativity into your life in whatever way that you deem fit. I hope that you will take away this message today, and I hope that you will invite yourself onto this journey of self-discovery. We need this more than ever now with emotional dysregulation on the rise. We need to be able to take a look inward and tell ourselves that we need to understand who we are, and this is how we would like to live our lives. That can be incredibly empowering and transformative. I just want to say one more thing before I end things. I hope today you will go home after this and you will ask yourself about the existential questions that plague you. And I hope that you take note of these questions and you don't shy away from them no matter what. You are, after all, waiting to be discovered anew, and infinite times over, if you will give yourself the chance to do that. Thank you.